Hello, so today we're going to be talking about my favorite books of the year in 2023. This is a list of my 10 favorite books of the year, and the way that I've chosen to cheat on this list is if a series has more than one book that would make the list, then they only count for one spot. That way my list isn't dominated by like 3 series, because I've been doing a good job of completing series, or at least reading through series. I've been doing a good job, better than years past. So if a series would take multiple spots, it just gets the one spot to make the list kind of varied. My other cheat is when I was making my top 10 list, it was 18 books long, even with the first cheat. So having to whittle it down to 10 was actually painfully difficult. So I have my top 10 that I'm gonna give to you, and then at the end of the video I'll do 5 honorable mentions. This video is coming to you before the end of the year because I historically don't read a ton while my kids are on school break, so the final 2 weeks of the year are dedicated to a reread of one of my favorite series, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because who doesn't want a reread of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Obviously we want that, everyone wants that. This list is going to be given to you according to the order in which I read them throughout the year, not according to my preference, how much I liked one over the other, because I couldn't be bothered. So starting with Tress of the Emerald Sea. This is the first secret project that Brandon put out this year, and it was my favorite, but Yumi came really close. It's a nautical-esque adventure about a girl leaving her rock, leaving her comfortable, cozy life that she was fine with her average life, but instead she has to go on an adventure to save someone that she truly cares about. And along the way, she teams up with some pirates. She has some self-discovery, some internal revelations, makes new friends, great relationship dynamics. It's so outside of what I'm used to with Sanderson, but it was the perfect outside his comfort zone for me. Plus, I'm not a huge fan of Sanderson's prose, and he really changed up his prose style to match the narrator's voice and to match the style, the adventure, whimsical style of the story, and I just really loved it. I just really loved this book. I read 11 Discworld books this year. I started out the year in January reading Guards, which was my first Discworld, and I loved it so much that I committed to reading all of the books all of the time. A book a month for the rest of the year, except for December, because I'm rereading Hitchhikers in December. Anyway, I started with Guards, and then Men of Arms, and then Feet of Clay, and then I broke that pattern of reading through the City Watch arc and decided to go back and read through the series chronologically. These books are just a really special part of Discworld, and I hope I find ones in the future that will dethrone them, but right now they are sitting at the top easily for me. I love Carrot. I love how sweet and innocent he is, and the shenanigans that get up to in that way. Each side character is uniquely fantastic, their own worldviews, their own personal failings, and how they interact with one another. Mix that with the fact that this is satirical. This whole thing is told with very dry British humor. I win reading these books. The Age of Madness, going out of our adventure, lighthearted, satirical kind of vibe, we've started with the Age of Madness trilogy. This was a great year for me for Abercrombie. I read A Little Hatred, I think at the end of last year, and then I got to read The Trouble with Peace and Wisdom of Crowds this year, and I read the Half a King trilogy, Half a King, Half a World, Half a War. Y'all, what's his name? Abercrombie. Abercrombie can write YA. It's very good as well. But anyway, Age of Madness was incredible. This is my new favorite series by Abercrombie. To include the standalones, it's surpassed all of his standalones too, where I was a really big fan of Best Served Cold. That was my long-running favorite of his. This trilogy is phenomenal. Again, I'm talking about the characters because it's who I am as a reader, but these 4 separate perspectives, they're different regions and different perspectives on what was going on around them, and then the way their perspectives would tangle together and the way that their personal actions would affect the next thing. Just phenomenal. And there were characters that I started off not liking and grew to they were some of my favorite characters. And then there were other characters that I kept defending and I kept thinking the best in. They just betrayed me. Just loved it. It came together so well. What an incredible trilogy. I've dedicated spoiler reviews. I have dedicated spoiler reviews for everything that I've talked about so far. Tress has a review. Discworld has gotten many reviews. Those early books definitely did, the Guards and the City Watch ones. And these two have as well. Go watch some reviews. I love these books. Okay, so Malazan. So I said I'm marking them according to what order I read them in. Obviously, I spread these series out, so some of them, you know, it's the order. It's in the order that it's in. So this year I read Malazan books 4, 5, and 6. I'm currently reading 7, but that's gonna eep into January. I won't have it done by the end of December. But all the Malazan books also have dedicated spoiler reviews. I'm definitely not a pro on this series and not the voice that you should probably be listening to at all for the series, but I have been really loving it. Malazan is a series that I've been talking about for a long time because, you know, these books, they'll keep you busy for a while. Personal explorations of raw character emotions and processing, betrayal, relationships grown and broken, how a character changes so much over time. Incredible action, incredible surprises and reveals. Malazan is one of the best written series that I've read. I think just in the sheer skill department, the amount of things that Erikson can do extraordinarily well is just astounding to me. But I've said it many times, I'll say it again. The big bar of entry for me in this series, the thing that makes me read through these books very slowly is not that the world building is extremely overwhelming, which it is, but it's that the emotions are extremely overwhelming. Erikson doesn't shy away from a lot of really difficult things, and it just takes a really big emotional toll on me. So as astounded as I am around every corner about so many things, I gotta breathe in between these books. Oh my goodness, the Dandelion Dynasty. Oh, this is my new obsession. Okay, these books, there's 4 of them. Oh my goodness. And I'm not done with Speaking Bones yet at the time that I'm filming this. I'm currently reading Speaking Bones, but it's in the list, okay? So this quartet, I will have Speaking Bones done by the end of the year, and this quartet has been so good. The King, what is it called? The Grace of Kings is the one that's probably the most difficult for a lot of people. I mean, I still loved it. It was still a 5-star book for me. But the way that it's structured, it reads more like many small arcs over a large span of time, following a family, following a dynasty, following a war, following a kingdom rising back up. This is following a kingdom that, or rather multiple island kingdoms that an emperor came in and conquered and then united them under one banner and squashed a lot of their culture and their history in doing so. And this is them rising up. This is the uprising. And it's told more like a historical, like a dynasty, and less like, you know, one chunk of story following one person. Wall of Storms is when it gets more into a little bit more, you zero in a little bit closer, but it's still so epic in scale. But we're following these different families, we're following these different areas in the world as they continue to navigate war and peace and rebuilding and so many things. Kin Liu, I've become such a fangirl of him. I read a collection of his short stories first, and then, oh my goodness, I read my first story by him this year because Bookborn told me that she thought I would like his stuff. Thank you, Bookborn. You're so right. Anyway, he can write so much with so few words, so much emotion, so much character depth, so much growth, so much with so few words. And he chooses to use a lot of words in these particular books, and I love them all. Blood Over Brighthaven is one that I read on ebook, so I don't have the physical, but I loved this book. This is by the same author as Sword of Kaigen. I did love Sword of Kaigen more. I did love Sword of Kaigen more than Blood Over Brighthaven, but as I was whittling down my list, I couldn't really let this one go. I think that it's funny. I think that the world in Blood Over Brighthaven is distinctly weak. It feels a little bit two-dimensional. It feels like it's not really fleshed out. It's not like you're not immersed in it, or at least I didn't feel completely immersed in it. But what it did do, which was have a very close look at these characters and how culture and society had shaped them and shaped their worldview, and then the revelation of how corrupt that world was and all of the, the secrets underneath the powers that be and what they need to do to push back against that very, very close, isolated story was just so good. And the conversations that we had on my Discord, while we were reading this book together were just, I loved so much. But anyway, this follows a girl who is fighting to be the first female scholar, and they don't allow very many women to take the test. They don't allow very many women to try. This is very much male dominated and by choice, by intent. And so she's trying to fight for her place. She gets through. That's not a spoiler. It happened in like the first chapter, or if not, then the second. She gets through, and then the book is her doing her studies, working and trying to secure her position in this new world that she's entered into. But she's also very tunnel visioned. She knows how she's been oppressed, but there's an entire people group in this world that have been far more greatly oppressed, and she buys into the stereotypes and into the ideals of the world so easily, and she's so frustrating to read from sometimes because of that, but intentionally, so it's done on purpose. Anyway, this is dark academia in a fantasy setting, and I loved it. The Remembrance of Earth's Past! Oh my goodness. You can tell I've loved these books because I've moved my shelves so I can put so many of these in, like, you know, the spot of honor. So the first book is called The Three Body Problem, and the next one is called The Dark Forest. I think this is my favorite of the three. And then the third is Death's End. A lot of people have a hard time with The Three Body Problem because of its structure, similar actually to Qin Liu, The Grace of Kings, which Qin Liu edited the first and last book of The Three Body Problem. Anyway, it's much more sprawling. It takes place over a large span of time. It takes place during the Cultural Revolution in China, and it's a first contact story. And this book and the books that follow are how humanity reacts and responds, and also what first contact might look like from a more bleak perspective. I loved these books. They are ambitious as all get out, not just in the sci-fi, like this is hard sci-fi, so not just in the sci-fi side of things, but also in the vastness. Like each book feels ambitious on its own, and then every book after is just like, you think that was ambitious? Let's go wider in scope. It's quite the trilogy, and I, again, am probably not the person to listen to talk about it because there are probably people who've read the series far more and who have been able to dig far deeper, but wow, did I love the experience of reading this trilogy. I think that this trilogy probably has some of the most horrific and disturbing, but not like gore, though there is gore, not in a gore sense, but in just a like very uncomfortable, very unsettling, very bleak kind of way. So there are scenes in this trilogy that I think will forever be thought of by me. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Excellent sci-fi horror. Highly recommend. Okay, next up is Wild Swans. I read this after I read The Three Body Problem, the first book in that trilogy. It's a nonfiction on the Cultural Revolution. I learned about the Cultural Revolution in school, but you know, I'm 31, so it's been a minute. So I wanted to read a nonfiction firsthand experience of people who have escaped China, who have lived through the Cultural Revolution, and some of the people, this follows 3 generations of women who lived through the Cultural Revolution, but also some of them participated in parts of it. They were able to escape. They now live in England, if I'm remembering correctly, and this is their story. This book has been banned in China, so I don't think it's censored. I'm pretty sure this is their story. And wow, is it a lot to read. But it was brilliant. I loved it so much. I really went back and forth. There's 2 nonfictions on this list. Well, one of them is an honorable mention, and I went back and forth on which nonfiction should be on the list because I love them both so much. But this one I think just had a bigger emotional impact on me, and I loved this book. Really showed me a lot of an inside look into the Cultural Revolution. It was wonderfully done. Next up is The Night of the Mannequins. This is another one that I kept going back and forth because there were 2 horror books, not sci-fi horror, which there's a couple sci-fi horror on this list, but actually strictly horror. There were 2 horror books that I was going back and forth on what to put on the list, and I'm going with Night of the Mannequins. Hang on, let me grab it. Okay, Night of the Mannequins is the one that I ended up putting on the list by impulse. So, I love this little bitty novella. So, actually, Stephen Graham Jones wrote Mapping the Interior, which was on last year's best of year. So I'm gonna start reading more Stephen Graham Jones. Anyway, Night of the Mannequins. This follows a group of friends who have this mannequin that they carry around with them all summer long to pull pranks. But the summer's ending, life is moving on. These kids are growing up. They're about to have to go off to college and live lives, and that's kind of disturbing to our main character. He really doesn't want to have to say goodbye to this life and this found family that he has. Anyway, the mannequin comes alive and maybe starts picking them off one by one. That's all I'll say about this novella. I will say that it is not what you would probably expect it to be. I loved this. It also got a dedicated review. Everything that I'm talking about got all my favorite books get dedicated reviews, except Wild Swans didn't. I usually don't for nonfictions, so there isn't a dedicated spoiler for the other either. Anyway, this book is just barely over 100 pages, so I'm not gonna say anything more about it, but I can tell you that I loved it. And when I did my spoiler review, it was basically just me flipping through, trying to make connections between different things to explain how this happened the way it did. I really loved it. It is very low rated though, so you may not like it, but I did. Okay, final book on this list for the top 10, and then I'll just really quick do the honorable mentions. I'm actually like buried in books now, so, oh, here it is. Annihilation. Oh, I love this so much. This is one of the last books that I've read before filming this video. This is another sci-fi horror, much shorter. And okay, so there's this abandoned town. In the abandoned town is an abandoned lighthouse, and then this tower or tunnel shows up, and nobody knows why or what it is or what kind of nonsense is going on inside. So there have been these expeditions that have gone through and gone inside the tunnel / tower to see what's going on, and weird things are inside. So we're following the 13th expedition, if I'm remembering correctly, and that team of scientists that are going into the tunnel to explore what's inside. And inside is some strangeness, to include writing on the wall that's written in like vines and mushrooms. And we watch the characters experience some very strange, very unexplainable things. And throughout the whole, like, it's strangely formatted. It's a weird book, but throughout the whole thing, I'm just like, what does that mean? Like, what? And I loved this experience so much. I love really weird books that aren't just like off the wall, what's going on, which this was, but that also feel really intentional. But also there are certain scenes in this book that are so disturbing, that are like so straight, like Lovecraftian, like what is happening right now, but also get that away from me. I'm not going into any tunnel. Like this is never gonna be my experience, but I'll experience it through this, and I loved it. It's a really weird book. If you don't like strange, unexplainable, but also disturbing, like get under your skin, what is happening, if that's not your thing, you know, don't read it. But I loved this. This is like my perfect, weird, strange sci-fi horror. Oh, I loved it. So I'm gonna actually reread it because I listened to the audiobook because the physical took forever to come in the mail because I buy everything secondhand. So I'm gonna reread it in February and then just blitz through the whole trilogy. And I'm so excited. Okay, that's my top 10 list. Those are my favorite books of the year. I loved them all. They were amazing. Let me tell you the 5 that were really hard to knock off the list, and I'll just tell them to you really quick. Dawn by Octavia E. Butler. This is another sci-fi horror. Abduction. The Earth has destroyed itself. Humanity has destroyed itself, and some aliens stepped in, grabbed a couple of the survivors, but also their idea of saving these people is not... It's horrifying. So we follow one character who is abducted. That's all you need to know, because it's very much a, like, she wakes up, she doesn't know what's going on. And so the discomfort and the horror of, like, fearing for your life in this impossible to understand situation is a big part of the book. So you don't need to know anything else. I loved this book, but it's extremely disturbing. And I started book 2 and it started dealing with kids. And I have a couple of hard lines where I'm like, nah, I don't want to deal with horror involving children. That's not gonna be me. So it's not to say anything against the series, it just got too dark in directions that I don't like to go in. So, but I loved book 1 and it was amazing. Dresden. This one was a real surprise. I mean, I've enjoyed Dresden Files. I think that it was a really, like, I've had a good time with the series, but the last book that I read this year, now I'm sure I grabbed it. It's somewhere. Whatever, it's this one, book 7. I'm sure I grabbed it, but I don't see it now. This one is the one that nearly made it onto my top 10 list because it was so excellent in the character work, in the quiet moments, in the fast-paced stuff, in the twists, in the things that had me on the edge of my seat, and on the ridiculousness. Like, it was the correct kind of nonsense. There were certain things that were so out of pocket, like they made sense within the world and made sense with everything that was building up to it, but also if I were to tell you what kind of shenanigans went on at the end of this book, you would look at me like, you liked that? And the answer is yes, it's the perfect kind of nonsense. I love that kind of, it was just so off kilter, and it was amazing. This series is quickly winning me over from, yeah, this is enjoyable, I could read one of these a month, to like, I'm still doing one a month, but to, I'm really looking forward to the next one, and I'm really looking forward to any that come after that book. I really love that book. Something Wicked This Way Comes. This is the other horror one that I was kind of going back and forth between this one and Night of the Mannequins because I just love them both so much. This is a carnival that comes into town overnight and it's wrong. The carnival is wrong, and we follow two best friends, young boys, I think they're like 10, that are exploring the carnival, and it's wrong. I loved this book. His Majesty's Dragon, which is the first in the Temeraire series, a naval man who gets a dragon egg and suddenly becomes a dragon rider, and it affects his life in every possible way, but we also get to see other dragon riders and experience dragon rider culture and combat, and they're in the Napoleonic Wars, and it's so cool. And also Temeraire, the dragon, sweetest little bean in the world. And finally, the last book of the honorable mentions is The Wager, which is another nonfiction following a shipwreck and the crew's survival. I thought that this was fantastically written. It was a gripping story. I was really never bored, though the people that I was buddy reading it with, quite a few people were bored. So, you know, do what you want with that, but I was not, and I loved it. I loved it so much. Okay, those are the top 10 books that I read this year with a whole bunch of cheating involved. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you want to talk about them more. Let me know what you loved that you read this year. I would love to get recommendations of your favorite books and why. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday on this channel, Mondays and Fridays on the manga channel, which is always linked in the description. I'll see you again soon. Bye.